Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to the show here. I am very excited to have with me Leslie Davis, who is a fellow loser. Excuse me. Now, yeah, high five. So Leslie has lost over 100 pounds, and there's quite a story behind that. And so, and I think I had a name of a program that involved the words losers to indicate that, like, those who've lost weight. But anyways, Leslie, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm so excited to finally get to connect with you because we've had a lot of back and forth and a lot of scheduling changes. So welcome to the show.
Well, John, I am so excited to finally get to meet you in person, even though it is, virtual person, because I've actually been stalking you for quite some time. I ran across you in a podcast that you did with Corinne Crabtree.
Okay. Yeah. That's
been a while back. I said, oh my gosh, this guy has been hanging out in my house, listening to the thoughts that are running around inside my head, because you use so many of the same words and phrases that I use. And they're crazy enough words and phrases that not everybody uses them.
Well, this is awesome. And, I'm like, wow, I had a stalker. This is great. I'm like, does this mean I've hit the big time? Well, that's awesome. It's so great to connect. And before we dive into your story, because it's quite a story, but where are you at currently, and how do you like to pass your time?
Well, right now I am sitting in Katy, Texas, and what I do with my time is I try to encourage people to discover that they really do not have a myself-sized hole in their heart that they need to be filling with food. I currently work with people one-on-one and help them learn to love themselves because, as you know, from having listened to your journey and over and over and over again, it was not loving yourself that created the problem in the first place. And what happened with me is I thought that nobody loved me. And the truth was, I was the only person who didn't love me. Everybody else loved me plenty. But until I came to recognize that it was a myself-sized, what I call a myself-sized hole in my heart that I was trying to fill with food, then change started happening.
Yeah. And so I think about, well, how do we get to this place where you're like 100 pounds overweight? Because I don't think people start out in life with this idea like, hey, I would like to be obese. I imagine like that wasn't a childhood dream of yours, if I'm putting two and two together.
No, it really wasn't. And truthfully, part of my problem was growing up. I come from a large family. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and our mother didn't really like to eat. So she would portion out the food exactly, to feed 8 people. The only thing I learned, and I talk about this in the book just a little bit, is how to divide a can of green beans by 8. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So I didn't really learn, what a portion looked like or anything like that. So when I went off to college, and let me tell you something, you go to college and you live in the dorm and you can go through the line more than one time.
Yeah, no kidding. When you grew up dividing a can of beans.
Yeah. And you discover chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes and gravy. Holy cow. Let me tell you, I can have seconds. Give me some. So that whole thing, the whole problem of not knowing how to monitor and control my own portions went into overdrive because I felt like I was never going to have this again. This is so
Yeah.
wonderful. I was never going to have it again. So I would get wrapped up in this. I'm never going to have it again. So I got to eat all of it now.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want people to think that we grew up poor or anything like that. We did. It's just that where we lived, it was not easy to get to a grocery store. Again, my mother didn't really like to eat. So, food was not at the top of her list of priorities. We did have
Right.
plenty of food. It's just not whatever.
Yeah, right. So, but I think this raises a really interesting point, and that is how our formative years really impact our relationship with food in ways that we probably don't realize because it was happening before we ever had an awareness that this was taking place. And as a dad of an 18-month-old who's the most beautiful little boy in the world, of course, no bias there. But I think about how am I shaping his future relationship with food, and how am I shaping his future just by being his dad? And I'm like, boy, that feels like a pretty big responsibility, one that I love to have. But this idea that a lot of our behaviors, our patterns of behaviors, our habits, our relationship with food, a lot of this was shaped in our formative years, and that's what can make it really, really difficult to work through.
Well, and I used to tell people that if you were to look at a picture of myself and my family, my three boys and my husband, it would be a game of, that Sesame Street game. One of these things is not like the other, because
Yeah,
none of my boys have an issue with weight.
yeah,
Because among the things that I taught them was, yes, I did put their food on the plate, but if they were finished, they were finished. They didn't have to eat everything on their plate.
mm,
I also had what I considered to be forbidden foods, the cookies and the chips and
yeah,
those things available, and they could choose to eat them or not eat them. And a lot of times they made a choice not to eat them. Oddly enough, none of my kids like candy. It would be
right,
available, but none of my kids liked it. So,
right,
they grew up knowing how to make choices. And
right,
now
right.
they're in their 20s and 30s and they still know how to make choices.
Right. So, when did you start gaining weight? Was this something that started taking place at university where
College.
oh, yeah, yeah, okay, so and, you know, if you have kids in their 20s, if it's probably is it safe to say that you're in your 50s?
No, I will, go you one further. A month and a half ago, I turned 65.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Is
Thank you.
that does that qualify as retirement age, south of the
I'm not
border?
retiring. I'm just now starting to live. I intend to live to
Yeah.
be 153 years old in one day. So my life is just beginning. I am doing everything I possibly can. I scuba dive. I've done all kinds of things. So no,
Which is absolutely awesome and super inspiring. And so, you started gaining weight, and I'm thinking, I guess why I was referencing age is maybe this would have been taking place would it be the 70s or the 80s?
the 70s, during the
Yeah,
70s.
and
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what was the discussion, around food and weight and dieting and things like that back then? And did that play a role in how you like? Was there a recognition that this is a problem, this shouldn't be happening?
Well, interestingly enough, during that time, Twiggy was very popular and she was extremely thin.
Mm,
Then you had Karen Carpenter, and in the late 70s, Karen Carpenter with anorexia,
okay.
came out.
Yeah.
It was not something that was known prior to that, or not something that was
Mm,
named prior to that. Now, the focus and the media and the magazines and the TVs and all that stuff, they focused on very thin people. So if you were not rail thin, you just weren't. And I can
right,
still
right.
remember, after I graduated from college, trying to get my weight down. And my judgment of being successful with my weight endeavors was if my hip bones stuck out past my stomach, if you could see between my
Whoa.
my thighs.
Right, if there was a thigh gap and
Yes.
bones poking out, which is unhealthily skinny, I would think,
Yeah, I mean,
indicating most people.
I'm 5'8", and back
Right, right.
during that time, I weighed probably 124, 125 pounds.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and looking back, my mother would tell me that I was overweight, but I see pictures of myself and I was not overweight. If anything, I was underweight.
Yeah, 5'8", 125 is quite slender, I would imagine.
Yes, but like I said, I judged my weight on, my hip bone sticking out past my stomach.
Yeah, and so when you started gaining weight in college, what was the heaviest weight that you got to?
I want to say I got up. When I went to college, I started out in my 120s, and then I got up to about 165. And then my senior year, I don't remember exactly what transpired, but I had almost like an emotional collapse,
Mm,
and I quit eating to the point that it made me ill. And so I started losing weight, and I was like, oh, I like this. So I kept
right.
losing weight. So I probably, looking back, I probably developed some level of anorexia.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
never went towards the bulimia. But then after I graduated from college and was working, I was in the fashion industry. So, you got to be fashionably thin, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, but the weight started coming back on after I got married. And then when I had my first child, I added some more weight, and then I sort of lost it. And then I had my second one, and I added more weight, and I never really was able to get it back off. But
Mm,
again, you're dealing with these things that I hadn't learned when I was growing up. I didn't understand portion control.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
I felt like when it came to certain foods, I was never going to have it again.
Yeah. Absolutely. And again,
So all of that, is still coming forward with me.
absolutely. Yeah. So at what point in time do you go? Like I need to make a serious change here because and like starving myself isn't the way forward. Like when did something go click there?
Well, the big click was, and I will tell you my age on it. I was 59. Okay,
Hmm.
it hit a point in my life where things weren't going very well, and I recognized I could either keep going the way that I was going, which was I couldn't stand to see myself in the mirror. I hated to see myself in a window or a shadow or anything like that. I didn't like to look at myself. I hated myself. Okay. I would
Mm-hmm.
ask, please, God, don't let me wake up in the morning. That's how bad it was.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so I said, you can either keep going this way or you can decide to get healthy mentally, physically, and emotionally. And that was the conversation I had with myself. I realized just doing one was not going to be enough,
Right.
that I
Yeah.
needed to tackle all three. And I actually have a stake in the ground out in the flower bed that I drove in the ground and said, today forward, I'm doing something different. And I
Mm,
say in the book, and I tell people all the time, if I would have known how difficult it was going to be, I don't know that I would have started, but I'm grateful that I did. And part of what I'm trying to do now is help other people do the same thing, but avoid the pain and the difficulty, or at least part of it that I
mm-mm.
went
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable that we can't escape all of the difficulty. And I will say, I feel as though the kind of like the weight loss and diet industry as a whole has done quite a disservice in the
through.
name. Yeah, like I don't even get started, but in the name of I guess trying to sell 12-week or 90-day programs. Nothing against them necessarily, and the individuals who work in them, but they've really brought into the sort of consumer consciousness this idea that like weight loss should be fast and easy and it should only take a couple of months, and if it takes longer than that something is wrong with you. And um, once you've done that, you're on easy street. And as you and I well know, it's like, no, this is something we have to manage for the rest of our lives. And but that's kind of a hard sell.
Well, it is, because in this day and time, especially in the United States of America, people want the quick fix. They want
Mm-hmm.
the easy out. They want the meals showing up on their doorstep, and all they have to do is push a button. They
Yeah.
don't want to have to think or make a decision. But the truth is, and this is what I had to learn, and I would argue with myself about it. You need to be aware of what it is that you are consuming.
Mm.
And then you also need to be aware of why you are consuming what you are consuming, when you are consuming that which you did not plan.
Yeah, getting your mind engaged in the process because we have so much. I call them emotional anesthetics. Whether it's junk food, whether it's alcohol, whether it's streaming TV, video games. Like there's so many of these things available to us to help us escape whatever our present situation is. There's an abundance of it, and unfortunately, our primal brain is kind of hardwired to go for these things, and so when we're trying to do this, we're up against quite a formidable foe in a sense. And I don't want to create animosity between ourselves and our brain because I absolutely love my brain. I think it's amazing. I'm so grateful I have it. But at the same time, we are up against like a hardwired kind of primal biological drive to move as little as possible, to eat as much as possible. And to store as much fat as possible and to lose it as slowly as possible. Now, these biological mechanisms, I mean, they're amazing in a sense. They've helped us survive centuries upon centuries of like food insecurity.
Mhm.
But it's not really serving us very well in the 21st century when we're just loaded with options here. So,
Oh,
go ahead.
well, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
But I was going to say, if I understand your story correctly, then so from after the birth of your, do you have 2 or 3 children? I should have been
I
listening more
had
carefully.
3. It's okay.
3.
I
There
had
we go. 3. So after your third child, you would were you sort of in your mid to late 30s here?
Actually, I was 38 when he was born.
Okay, so for 20 years, you were going in the direction of like gaining weight and struggling with
Mhm.
this, you
Right.
know. And I think it's kind of easy for the little wave of the hand, just 20 years, that's all. Yeah. So that must have been like incredibly difficult. And you said you have like, family and friends and people who love you. Did people try to like, did they make remarks, comments? Did they try to intervene? Like, kind of what was that sort of stretch of time in your life like? I mean, you're probably busy. You got 3 boys. That's going to keep you on your toes, but or maybe it was difficult too. But like, what's that time in your life kind of like?
It was very, very busy, very chaotic because there's 9 and 11 years between my oldest 2 and the youngest one. So, you're
Okay.
talking about older kids and then a baby. So it was very chaotic. And this is what I recognize now. And this is part of the other part of the message that I give to people. You can only control you. That's number
Mm,
1. But secondly, if you don't put on your own oxygen mask first, you're going to be laid out in the aisle. The plane's going to land, and people are going to be stepping over you saying, "There's that nice person who helped me."
mhm,
So, what I did not know, what I did not understand, what I had not been taught was it is okay to take care of me first and then take care of everybody else. So part
mm,
of what I had to unlearn was all these social norms and my family norms and all this history and everything, was that it was okay for me to put me first. Because when we're running around taking care of everybody else and we're not putting us first, well, we keep getting shoved to the bottom, right? And
yeah.
the other thing that starts happening is you start having feelings. Oh my gosh, heaven forbid that you should have feelings
Yeah.
like resentment, like anger,
Yeah.
like, where do I fit into all of this? Pity. I mean, all these feelings start coming up. And if we have not been taught from a very, very early age how to cope with our emotions, how to experience them, then we start running to that, what I call drug of choice, to numb
Mm,
the
mm.
pain because we
Yeah.
want the pain to stop at all cost.
That's that good old primal brain.
Exactly. But the other thing is, when we have spent so much of our life being shamed,
Mm,
you should be ashamed and experiencing shame and feeling shame. When those feelings show up, the thing that you want to do is release the tension. So you
yes.
release the tension by doing whatever, eating the whole bag of potato chips and the onion dip and the whole thing of
Yeah.
Oreo cookies and, getting
Dipped in peanut
too,
butter.
yeah, pretending that you're buying for 2 people when you go through McDonald's and you get, 2 Big Macs. Um, because then what happens is shame is set off
Yeah, yeah.
and you know how to cope with shame. You
Mm,
know
mm.
how to do that. And I say to people, I could do shame with one hand tied behind my back and blindfolded. It was the other emotions I struggled with.
Yeah, I think about how our brain becomes like familiar with these certain states of being, and in one sense like seeks them out because of the familiarity. And I think you've touched on something really, I think kind of fascinating, and not necessarily in a good way, but how we are conditioned to be ashamed of our condition, of our human condition, and thinking like, where did this come from? This idea to be ashamed of ourselves for our human struggles and for our imperfections.
Well, it comes from, growing up. If you
Mm,
express a feeling, or you take an action and you do something, and you make a mistake or whatever, an adult, a trusted adult in your life will say to you, or could say to you, you should be ashamed of whatever you said, did.
mm, mm.
And then, think about how many times that comes up. And so they're
Yeah.
reinforcing that you should be, got that,
Mm,
ashamed.
mm.
So that's a state of existence, right?
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Language is so powerful. Words
Language
really
is
frame our interpretation of
powerful.
reality.
Yeah.
And
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 and part of what I had to do, and part of what I help other people do, is reframing that
mm, mm.
noise, that conversation that's going in our head.
Yeah, super, super important. I just actually did a presentation this morning on exactly that, on reframing the sort of the ticker tape that runs through our minds, because it can feel like out of control, and it can feel really difficult to rein in, and a lot of it runs on autopilot. These thought patterns become automatic, and it's. I don't want to say we're working against our brain, but we have to be aware that this is what our brain's sort of default tendency is if we're ever going to course correct. So
100%.
yeah. So, and imagine in the sort of this 20-year stretch between like your late 30s and your late 50s, there were at least some attempts to create change, but they didn't succeed. Um, I'm kind of curious, actually. Was there anything like really crazy or reckless or out there that you tried?
Well, one time, I mean, this is way back before I even had kids, I tried the liquid protein diet,
Okay.
where you consume, I think, 2 tablespoons of liquid protein a day. Lasted about a week on that, because I got hungry. But during the 20-year stretch, I did try Quick Weight Loss Center, where,
Mhm.
your food is very controlled and you're taking all these supplements and pills and all this kind of stuff. And it didn't work. I mean, it did
Yeah.
work, but it didn't work. But it's something that you touched on earlier. We can take on these programs, and I talk about mouse print.
Mm.
If you look at the mouse print of all these great programs that they're flashing across the TV, you look at the mouse print, and I haven't found mouse glasses for it yet. But
Right. Right.
if you get up close, you can read it. And it all says results are done or achieved with healthy diet and exercise.
Mm.
So this product, this whatever it is that they're touting, is not the answer. It all
But
comes back to a healthy diet and exercise.
we want it to be the answer because again,
100%.
and so it's like there's like a vicious cycle of and we don't need to be ashamed of wanting quick and easy. It's sort of again, it's a natural primal tendency to want to avoid pain and discomfort and struggle. It's really something sort of a higher level part of being human that makes us want to strive and achieve and grow and develop. And so, liquid protein diet sounds just awful, like, just awful. Like you say, I got hungry. I'm like, "No kidding." I would have been, like, gnawing the table leg or something, just, trying to eat, like, 2 tablespoons of junk. Like, oh, man. Who thinks up these things? Like, what sort of sadist thinks up these kinds of things where it's like, "I know what we're gonna do. We're basically gonna put people in a dietary straitjacket and see how long we can make them suffer before they finally break." So the fact that you made it a week is like,
Well, and how much money are we going to be able to collect from them in the process?
yeah, yeah, absolutely taking advantage of people in like their most sort of distressed emotional state. So did you must have had this moment at some point in time in your life where you go like, and I think you talked about this, you put a stake in the ground. And it's funny, I was
Mhm.
actually picturing, I must be hungry because I was picturing like a meat steak, a beef
Sorry,
steak.
sorry.
Yeah, I was like, you put a stake in the ground. Oh, you're hoping to grow like a cow tree. um, yeah, clearly it's a Friday afternoon when we're recording this.
Well,
So
I am in Texas, so
right,
hey.
and I live in the Texas of Canada, which is a province of
Exactly,
Alberta. So
100%. So
so you put a stake in the ground, and this was like this symbolic step you were taking, where I am no longer living the way I used to, and there's something very like poignant about this, because it's like we have to metaphorically like put to death our old self in order to move into becoming a new person. And so what was this? I'm just wondering, was this experience kind of cathartic for you?
It felt more as if I was closing a door
Mm,
on accepting less than what I believed I deserved.
I love that.
And I was opening the door to discovering what I did deserve and to discovering who Leslie really and truly was. Because not only in that 20-year period did I pack on all that weight, but somewhere Leslie got lost.
Yeah.
And so I was deciding that I'm going to find her again and I'm going to discover who she really is.
What a cool journey to go on. So, and you've lost over 100 pounds.
And
Now,
kept it off.
and kept it off, which is really important. Now, I wonder how many people ask you this question: how did you do it? And
Oh,
so, and of course, I'm all the time, right? Because we're looking for the template. Give me the templates, please. And so I'm kind of curious if you could just share a little bit about the journey of losing 100 pounds. And I imagine it was not a linear journey, and what it kind of looked like for you.
well, the first thing that I did, as I mentioned already, I didn't know what kind of, what portion control looked like, what, eating a healthy diet looked like. So the first thing I said was, I need to figure out a plan that's going to work for me. So I went to Weight Watchers because it's, the most established plan. I knew that I could pick and choose the food that I ate, that they weren't going to dictate what I had to eat. Because I'm sorry, but there are just some things I will not eat. So I started with that to guide me. But then I added in a layer a little bit later because I started recognizing as I was tracking my food manually with pen and paper, that as I would write down the days when I was overeating, let's say I went to a party and I had 3 pieces of cake and 2 pieces of pie and, a giant bag of chips. And yes, that did happen. I'm not making it up. I would write down, what was going on. And that was when I had the aha moments, not the first time, but about the 5th time. I was like, okay, something else is going on. And that was when I started recognizing how my emotions were so locked in on the food that I was eating. And as I started recognizing the emotions that I was feeling, I started naming the emotions that I was feeling. I started giving myself permission to feel the emotions for as long as I could. Sometimes it was 30 seconds, sometimes it was 15 minutes. But what really helped me with that was getting pen and paper and having a written conversation with myself. And I discovered what I call my very best friend in the whole wide world. Because part of my problem was that I never felt heard. Well, it wasn't that anybody wasn't listening to me. It's just, oh my gosh, how many times can somebody stand to listen to you whine and wail about the same thing, right? Yeah. Who is awake at 2 o'clock in the morning that wants to listen to you go on and on and on about whatever it is? They're not being mean. They got their own lives. They got their own stuff. So I started talking to my very best friend in the whole wide world, which is me.
Yeah,
I am available at 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't care if you're telling me for the 10,000th time about my mother-in-law. I don't care.
Right. Yeah.
I'm willing to listen. So I write every single day. I still do it. And on days when something trigger and I feel an emotion bubbling, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, and I feel the pull towards the pantry, I will ask myself, because all the answers to everything is in the pantry, even though
to all of life's problems,
except according to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the answer is always 42, right?
Right, of course. Maybe it's 42 cookies.
Could be. But anyway, I'll ask myself, what's really going on? And then I'll start writing, what's really going on. And that pull starts easing up because I'm being heard. And understanding how closely connected my feelings, my thoughts, and my drug of choice were connected made a huge difference.
Yeah. And actually, Debbie shares enjoying this. That's so awesome, Debbie. Glad you're tuning in live.
Yes.
And she also quite enjoyed the mouse print reference there. I haven't heard it referred
Thank
to,
you.
the fine print, but that's a great, at first when you said mouse print, I was picturing like a footprint, but like a mouse's footprint. So, yes, trying to read the mouse print. Um, so you started connecting the dots here, and I love like how you describe journaling, because it's a thing that I mention often to people. And I think the written word is more like it needs to be pen to paper.
Right.
There's a difference between shaping letters with their hand versus like pecking keys, or maybe people actually use their whole hand, unlike me. But there's a difference when we shape letters on the page. And I think it's so important when we go to do something like this that we don't attach any judgment to it
No.
whatsoever. But we just, because our brain could be like, have you ever had a crazy dream and you wake up and you're like, what on earth was happening
Yeah.
in that dream? Like, I was riding an alligator who was driving a tractor, while it was snowing in summertime. And you're like, how do any of these things like come together? Well, who knows? So our mind can be like this crazy place, and sometimes it can be hard to sort of decipher it. But when we start to put it down on paper, it's like it stops morphing and changing shape. You can kind of pin those thoughts down because now you're putting them on paper and you're taking them out of your head where they're just like going crazy and wild.
Well, and that was what I came to recognize. If I could get, the words down on the paper, and what would happen is the hamsters would get off the wheels.
Mm-mm.
And so I'm on a mission to get all the hamsters off of everybody's wheels, send them all back to the pet market, and let's put the pet market out of business. But a couple of
I
months
was thinking of
ago,
like hand the hamster a pen and teach it to write.
well, there you go. A couple of months ago, I was really angry about something, and I was writing, and then I started writing. I'm not going to talk about this, and because I can't remember what my answer was, and the thought that came into my mind, which I actually put on the piece of paper, was, "Who are you lying to?" And I was like, "Oh, never mind." And so then I started writing, what it was that I was really feeling and why I was
Yeah.
feeling it, and all of that. Because how many times do we lie to ourselves? And that's the other thing that can
I
get
get
us into
comfortable with
trouble
that.
with our weight.
Yeah.
We lie to ourselves about so many things. And no, I do not like tracking food. I still do track food
Mm-mm.
because it's too easy to lie to myself about what I really am doing.
This is one of the things that I talk about a lot in my coaching work, and maybe you talk about this as well. And it's like the ability to be present with somebody through an uncomfortable situation, because in order to create change, we have to get to those sort of deep and kind of icky and uncomfortable places where we're so used to retreating from, and just burying in a mountain of junk food and Netflix and video games and alcohol and things like that. So we have to be able to, and so I think, but you practice this like with yourself first. Let me get in touch with this really uncomfortable place. Let me process it instead of bury it.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if there's an exact linear or direct correlation, but I think about all this extra weight that so many of us are carrying around, and I picture it as there's an emotional, like a metaphysical connection to that weight, and it's the more that we're carrying, the more baggage that we have. And so this process of journaling is like unpacking, and it takes some time.
Mhm.
And
It
so
does take some time, and it takes being honest with yourself.
mm. And so I guess the next question you probably get asked is how long, because I get asked this one, how long did it take you to lose 100 pounds? Like when you actually started on this journey kind of for good, so to speak, how long did it take to lose 100 pounds?
Well, I thought that it was only going to take me 12 months.
Mhm.
Actually, I thought it was going to take me less than that. I started at the end of February, and I knew that I was going to have all the weight off before I got to the end of the year.
Mhm.
Ha! It took until until the end of September the following year to get it
Right.
off.
So a little closer to
But
18 to 20 months.
yes, but looking back, and that's one of the benefits of looking back.
Mm.
Looking back, I'm grateful that it did take me that amount of time, because I now recognize how many habits, how many beliefs, how many thoughts I needed to rewrite, rescript, retrain, how many things I needed to whatever. And
Mm-mm.
if I would have lost the weight in that short period of time, I would have been gamifying the situation, and I would not have the tools, the skills, or the maturity to be able to maintain and keep moving forward. Because
Mm-mm.
this, when you go on a trip, for example, the trip is not about the airport that you land in,
Mm-mm.
right? Because you don't get back on the plane and go back home. It's like
Right.
I was talking to somebody today and they said, they went to Florida. I said, well, your trip wasn't about getting to Florida. You didn't get back on the plane and go back home. The trip is about what happens after you arrive. So if we can look at losing this weight, shedding this weight, changing our thoughts, our beliefs, and all of these systems as simply the airport that we are landing in, but the real journey begins after we leave the airport. It's the rest, everything else that's after we leave the airport. Because truthfully, our journey is not about arriving at that airport.
Yeah, and I love
It's
this
about what
analogy
happens afterwards.
because I say weight loss is a doorway, not a destination.
Right.
And I love this analogy because I think it's a really great way of expressing it. Like the airport isn't the destination.
No.
And that's what keeps people like hopping on the plane and going back to the original destination is I don't know what comes next because so much of who I am is connected to this. And I love the honesty. And because I think about if you ask someone, would you rather try to lose weight 6 times over an 18-month span, or would you rather lose it once and just be done with it for the rest of your life? Because we think, 18 months, that's a long time. Well, over the course of a lifetime, 18 months really isn't that long. And the thing is, you have so much life ahead of you, which I'm really, excited as we sort of wind this down. You wrote the book, You Can't Eat Love. And I think I haven't yet had a chance to read it. So definitely it's on my reading list. I wanted to chat with you first, which is usually backwards. Usually you read the book and then you chat to the individual. But I wanted to get to know your story here authentically before I actually read the book. And then I'll have actually a greater appreciation for it. But you talk about now, and I want to share this because I think it's really important for people to see the things that you're doing now that maybe, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you wouldn't even thought, it wouldn't have entered your mind to do these kinds of things. You talk about like scuba diving and you're living your life and you're 65 and doing this where people would have maybe given up a long time ago and said, I'm over the hill. There's no hope for me.
Yeah, 100%. But the thing that I came to recognize is I had a choice. I could make a decision. I could either keep going the way that I was going, or I could decide that I was going to live my very best life. And I understood that I wasn't content with the life that I was living. And there were things that I wanted to do. And I kept saying, I really want to do this. But the way I felt about myself, I didn't believe enough in myself to believe that I could do these things. And so starting to believe in myself and loving myself, I was like, why not take up scuba diving? Am I the world's greatest scuba diver? No, I'm not. The last time, a couple of years ago, we went to Belize and I forgot to fill up the BC and I was sinking and they had to send somebody to pull me up. And what a mess, But
I'll have to connect you with a guest I had on, Laura DeSisto, who goes scuba diving with sharks, and she's also in her 60s.
Yeah, and I took up heavy weightlifting. On my 65th birthday, I hit a personal best deadlifting 230 pounds.
Wow, that is so awesome.
A few days later, I did 235. I can bench press 90 pounds. I can leg press 260 pounds. I'm 65 years old. I don't weigh anywhere close to those pounds.
But
your life is over when you decide your life is over.
I love that.
And it is not too late to make a decision that you're going to start living your best life. And part of living your best life is taking care of yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally. And if it means losing some weight, okay, decide, make a decision, and then start taking action.
You already like preempted the question that I wanted to ask, which, but it's so good that it bears repeating. And, but just before we hear that wonderful nugget of wisdom again, because I definitely want it repeated, as we wind this down, if people want to get in touch with you or connect with you, we will include this in the show notes as well, but where's the best place for people to find you?
The best place to find me is on my website, which is youcan'teatlove.com. There you can find connections to Facebook, Instagram, and my email. And I do respond to each and every email. I've had people say, you're not a virtual assistant, or no, I'm a real person. It's just
that is awesome. And I love that you have the domain youcan'teatlove.com. So That is absolutely incredible. So as we wind down this, I always ask my guests this: what is one nugget of wisdom you would like people to take away from this conversation today? And I would love you to repeat that beautiful thing that you said just a couple of minutes earlier.
Recognize that it is not too late to make the decision to start living your best life. And if you decide that you're going to make that decision, recognize that you need to focus mentally, physically, and emotionally, and start taking action so that you are living your best life. Because trust me, it is not too late until it is too late.
I love that. Leslie, thank you so much for being on today. It's such a pleasure chatting with you. I really appreciate your time.
Well, John, thank you so much, and I will continue stalking you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.